Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today at this Lesson 8 Exam Review Part 1 webinar. The webinar is being recorded today, so feel free to watch this back at your convenience before taking the Lesson 8 exam. Also, we do have a Part 2 webinar scheduled for tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, so please be sure to watch Part 2 in addition to watching Part 1 before taking the exam. Hola, bienvenidos a Español. My name is Zach. I'm one of two Spanish teachers here at Penn Foster. With us here today is my colleague Dan, who is available to answer any and all of your questions that may come through. We do have a variety of ways for you to get in contact with us if you have questions on the course material. Phone option, 1-888-427-1000. We are available Monday through Friday, 9 to 6 Eastern Time. Email and chat options on your student portal. If you have a quick question, feel free to text the word LEARN to 39033. And finally, if you need a little bit more detailed help, please feel free to schedule an appointment. In addition to reaching out to Dan or myself, please feel free to check out the academic resource websites as you see on the left. These contain a multitude of different things to help you out with the Spanish course. If you've not been to a webinar with us before, you do have a couple of ways to interact with us today. You can raise your hand, as you see with the hand icon, or if you have a direct question, feel free to type that in that questions box for us below. So on today's objectives, we're going to cover a few things. First is to review present tense formation and usage. Next, discover verbs with similar meanings. The next item, identify Gustar phrases. Gustar is the verb to like in Spanish. And also this concept of the personal a. And finally, we're going to explain irregular stem change and irregular stem change verbs. And if you have any questions at the end, we'll take some time for those. So to start off with, Exam 8 is a 4-part exam. In the first section, you're going to be translating sentences from English to Spanish. In the next section is multiple choice. You will be dealing with reflexive and stem change verbs in this section. The next section is translation once again, although this time it's Spanish to English. And then finally, part 4, depending on the time of your enrollment, you will have one of these options. So if you've enrolled earlier into the high school program, you will be presented with the listening comprehension, which is fill in the blank section, or the alternate option, enrolling a little bit more recently, is translation and free response section. So you'll just want to follow all the directions as stated on your exam. To start off with usage, let's first review, as it says, these key verb terms. The first one up is infinitive. The infinitive is the to form of the verb. So anytime you see an infinitive, it will always end with AR, ER, or IR. So in that example there, decir means to say or to tell. The next verb term is a stem, and the verb stem is all of the letters that precede the ending. So in decir, DEC. And then finally, conjugation is when you take a stem and you add a specific ending to it. You're going to create subject-verb agreement, which means that your subject, if you have a singular subject, you have to have a singular verb. If you have a plural subject, you're going to have a plural verb. So when you combine the stem and the ending, that forms your full verb form. Couple others as well. Person. So person tells you who is doing the action of the verb. So this can be in first person, like I or we. It can be in second person, meaning you. Or it can be in third person, he, she, or they. Now, Spanish does something interesting with the pronoun you. It is used in second and third persons. This is unlike English because English really just uses second person. But the whole notion of using the second or the third person is formality. So if you're talking to a friend, you're going to use that second person form, whereas if you're talking to, say, a teacher or a parent, you might use the third person form. And then our final verb term is number. So number describes how many subjects are doing the action of the verb. and this can be classified according to singular or plural. So to demonstrate pronouns a little bit, we have some charts of the English personal pronouns, and we have the Spanish equivalents. So in English, first person singular I, you, he, she, it, we, you, they. In Spanish, you see them listed yo tú, él, usted. This usted is that formal you that we just discussed. Nosotros for we, vosotros really is a Spain form, really just used in Spain. And then the final one's ellos and ellas ustedes, so they or the plural of you. So as you can see in these notes below, second person plural vosotros form used primarily in Spain. The rest of the Spanish-speaking countries really use the third person as a sign of formality. And, as I mentioned, there are two ways to say you in Spanish, second or third person. Again, familiar in the second person and formal in the third. Translation of present tense, you have two possible options. The first translation is verb dependent. So these verbs don't look like anything similar. You can see they're spelled differently. There's no commonality between these three verbs in the examples. So I run, I eat, I sleep, etc. The second translation of the present tense is progressively. So you're going to use a form of the verb to be, so am, are, was, were, etc., plus a gerund. So I am running, I am eating, I am sleeping, etc. Next up, we're going to talk about how to conjugate a present tense verb. Very useful information for any and all of your Spanish assignments. So generally speaking, to conjugate a regular verb, these are verbs that are going to follow the same pattern. Step one, you're going to remove the infinitive ending. So again, the AR, the ER, the IR, to determine the stem of the verb, so all the letters before that ending. And then step two, you're going to add these new endings that you see in the charts to the stem. And as you can see, there are similar endings in our two groups here. So verbs that end with AR or verbs that end with ER or IR. But there are some differences as well. So the first person singular form is the same, O. With the AR verb, you have as in second singular or ace in the second singular for ER, IR, and so on throughout the rest of the charts. So very important that you memorize these specific verb endings in order to conjugate a present tense verb. We're going to be showing you some examples up next, a couple common Spanish verbs that you may or may not be tested on for the exam, fully conjugated in present tense. So our first example, correr, which means to run, and our second one, entrar, which means to enter. And as you can see, all we're doing is dropping off that ER from correr or AR from entrar and adding the endings that we just learned on the last slide. So corro, for example, I run, corres, you run, corre, he or she runs, etc. The next item here is phrases with present tense, and we see that there are certain phrases which use a variety of tenses. And for this webinar and for this exam, we're really just going to look at present tense. So we have three verbs that use a verb phrase with present tense: pensar que, creer que, and dudar que. So as you can see the definitions below. And the big thing we want you to understand with this is you do need to include the word que after each of the conjugated verb forms in order for the sentence to be grammatically correct. So as you can see, we demonstrated the conjugation of pensar over on the right. Pienso, piensas, piensa, and the rest. These are the verbs to think. And as you can see in the example at the bottom of the slide, yo pienso que es verdad. We do need that que in the sentence. If you do not include it, the sentence would be incorrect in grammar. So next we want to talk about verbs with similar meaning in this lesson 8. As you can see, there are certain verbs which mean similar things, but a little bit different translations. So this is a really good slide to just keep, handy for yourselves as you're working through this lesson, writing down these verbs that may come up, so you don't confuse them. We're not going to go over each one here, but as you can see, the first set talks about verbs to see or to look at. The next couple verbs talk about actions of coming or entering, arriving, etc. And then the last couple talk about place, putting, setting, but also be careful because there is a reflexive verb. A reflexive verb, as a reminder, is a verb that's done to oneself. So you can see poner means to put, place, or set, say, the plates on the table. But ponerse, reflexive, means to put on clothing or something similar. And colocar at the end, relates more with poner, a non-reflexive verb. So as I said, definitely a good chart to keep handy, to understand the differences in these verbs. The next thing we want to talk about is gustar. And as I mentioned at the beginning, gustar is the verb to like in Spanish. So what we're going to do is talk about how to form a sentence using gustar. So you really would just want to use the form of the verb. So in the present tense, we would have gusta or gustan in the third person. And the third person is going to be key. So when we start with writing a gustar sentence, the first step, we want to insert an indirect object pronoun. And as you can see, there's a list there. So me, te, le, nos, and les. With indirect object pronouns, they usually accompany the word to as well. So me to me, te to you, etc. After writing down the indirect object pronoun, just come up with the appropriate third singular, third plural form of gustar. And to tell the difference, basically, if you use a singular form, you're going to have one thing that is liked. If you use the third plural form, you have multiple things that are liked. Now, an interesting thing about gustar is when you have a list of infinitives, you're always going to be using the singular form, no matter if you have one infinitive or 50 infinitives, always going to be using that third singular form. And we're going to show you some examples here next. So, me gusta dibujar, I like to draw. In this case, we have an infinitive construction, dibujar, ending with that AR. And we see that we use gusta, ending with an A, for one infinitive. Le gustan libros, she likes books. This time, you may want to use the singular form of gusta, or gustar, excuse me, in conjunction with the subject. However, that's definitely incorrect in Spanish. You always want to think about the thing that is liked and how many things are liked to come up with the appropriate form of gustar. So in this case, libros is plural. Gustan must be used for the plural form. However, we have that singular subject or indirect object pronoun. And then finally, we end with an example of using two infinitives. However, you see that gusta, again, singular form is going to be used. The next grammatical point is the personal a. This is definitely something very Spanish related. It does not happen in English, but Spanish uses the personal a whenever you have a person that's the direct object of the sentence. It must precede the direct object. It's not optional, as you can see as it's stated there, to include within these sentences. So the examples below, El lobo ve a ella, the wolf sees her. Since her is a person, and she's the object of this sentence, that a is going to precede the word for her. The second one, you may be wondering, why does it say all and not a? This is really because there are certain prepositions that combine with the masculine definite article el to form a contractive form. So really this sentence is El lobo ve a el muchacho. So a el just becomes al. So in the final section of today's webinar, we're going to talk really about irregular verbs, and in particular, 6 irregular verbs in present tense. These are definitely verbs that you want to write down, verbs that may be tested for the exam, so definitely you do want to memorize these conjugations. We're going to talk about the 6 that you see listed on your screen: conocer and saber, the verbs to know; poner, to put or place or set; tener, to have; venir, to come; and ver, to see. So to start off with, we'll look at the forms of tener, to have. And they're irregular for a couple of reasons. First of all, the first person singular contains a G, and there's no G in that infinitive. So that's definitely a unique thing about this verb. And as you can see, that happens with the first person singular of all 3 verbs here, tener, venir, and poner, having that G. Now the second, third singular and the third person plural in tener and venir contain this IE in the stem. So as you can see, the original infinitive is just TE, but the verb forms in these person and numbers do contain TIE for your stem. So again, these are, all these sections in green are the irregular forms of these verbs. As you can see, poner does not follow that second and third singular and third plural formation like tener and venir. It just conjugates as normal, dropping the ER and adding the endings. So we have those 3, and then we have these 3, saber, conocer, or ver. One difference you do want to make sure you're aware of is the difference between a saber and conocer. They both mean to know, but they're used differently depending on context. So if you know something for certain or know how to do something, you're going to be using forms of saber. But if you're more acquainted with or familiar with a person, place, or thing, you're going to use conocer. The good news about these 3 verbs is there's only one irregular form in each, and it's that first person singular. And that does conclude today's session. We will definitely take any of your preguntas that you may have. Additionally, please feel free to reach out with one of the contact options listed on your screen by visiting the academic resources page as well. As a final reminder, please join us for part 2 tomorrow for the lesson 8. It is a rather lengthy grammatical unit, so a lot of different things to cover. That's why we did split it up into 2 parts. So if you can't make it live, please be sure to check out the recorded session. We thank you for your attendance today. Please feel free to ask any last-minute questions, and have a great day.